Thank you for joining me on this session. It's wonderful to have the opportunity to talk about the work that we do at DSA and specifically some of the work I've been doing working for the Severe Behaviour Response Team as a consultant. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of what the Severe Behaviour Response Team entails. In case for those who don't know. So the Severe Behaviour Response Team works alongside the DB Mass program, and both of us work under the Dementia Support Australia program. The difference with Severe Behaviour Response Teams is that the behaviour itself is a little bit more, I guess, severe in some ways. There's usually quite significant risk of one of our clients with someone living with dementia hurting somebody, or they've hurt somebody, or there's a high chance they're going to hurt somebody again, or hurt themselves. They could be damaging property. They could be at risk of leaving the care home, and that could be a substantial risk to them. And because of these behaviours, the care home is thinking of sending the person to hospital, and we give it a 48-hour window. So at point of when it's triaged and escalated as an SBRT case, the consultant that gets the case, it's a race against time. You've got 2 days, 48 hours to get out on site and assess the person and actually start pulling some recommendations and some advice around how to manage that behavior together. And I'm based in Melbourne, and there's been many cases. We cover Australia, and there's been many cases where I've had to jump on a plane very quickly and get to Cairns or get to Alice Springs or Tasmania or anywhere. So it's a very, very dynamic job. You get to do a lot of things and see a lot of people, but it's also quite, as you can understand, quite challenging at times. And there's been many times when I get a case and we get the information sent to us, and we just get the reason for referral. So before we've even phoned anybody or even arranged a visit, we read the overview notes of what's going on, and there's like a problem to solve, and I look at that and I just think, wow, how on earth am I going to solve that? And there's probably been a number of times when I've been on site and I'm stumped to know what to do. And the two cases, I'm going to discuss two case studies today. The two case studies are often, I think back to, because I think, we've been in this situation before. We've not known what to do before. And I think back to these as really challenging cases that inspire me to keep going and to be able to solve things. So the first one I'm going to talk about is a gentleman named Marty. This is quite a case close to my heart. Again, I'm going to show you the reason for referral and how it came across to us in the care home. So Marty was referred to our service. The first thing we have is physical aggression and alcohol-related dementia and psychosis as well. So physical aggression, alcohol-related dementia, and psychosis. Very fast, described as very, very fast and very strong. Might have an intellectual disability. Chasing and hitting staff with a broom and other weapons. Everyone's scared. Marty was sent to hospital twice for aggression, and the care home require assistance upon readmission to the care home. So they need us to try and support him when he's arrived. Everyone's scared, sent to hospital twice, need some help. Thanks. So no pressure then. So I think, and I tend to think in pictures. I tend to sort of think, when we get these images, these cases over, all these images are conjured in my mind, and scared, psychosis, all these sort of things, the general dynamics of it and what's happening and how people are feeling, and are people just not coping well at all. And the other word that really comes to my mind is weapons. And I just think, okay, we've got somebody that's obviously in that much distress that they are picking up whatever they can pick up to defend themselves, or whatever, because you're throwing it in with a psychosis, you're throwing it in with and then there's that element of an intellectual disability, perhaps. That's just guessed. And it is, so there's so many things. And I just think, yeah, how are we going to solve this one? So I was on site. I got on site within a day, I think. I got this in the morning, and then I drove that evening, and I was arrived the following morning on site. It was a rural visit. It was a 4-hour drive, I think. But we got there, and yeah, I got on site and I met with everybody, and I saw Marty. And how I approach these cases myself, I think very quickly what I'm going to do. I have two choices. One, I can go over and acquaint myself with the person with dementia, and I can meet with them, and I can have a chat with them, and we can get the ball rolling that way. Or I hide. And what I do is I hide, I can blend in the background, because I only get one shot really as well. I only get one shot at meeting the person. If I want to take it from another view, because I don't want to become a trigger and I don't want to become a dynamic so early on, I have to hide, blend myself in, sit with other people and just observe and just watch what's happening. And I chose for this particular case that because everyone was very scared, everyone was very stressed, I got on site and I just sat over the other side of the room, and I saw this gentleman, younger gentleman, sitting literally with his back to the wall. He sat in this one spot with his back to the wall, with his hands on the arms of his chairs. And he looked, every time there was a noise or every time there was somebody coming into the room, he would jump. He would just be so hypervigilant. He was just pinned to this thing. And I sat and I watched this for about, I would say, arguably a good 3 to 4 hours, just to see if he'd move, just to see what he was going to do. Because of course there's this tension that you're expecting this chap to suddenly get up and grab a broom and turn it into a weapon, or something like that. He sat there. They brought his dinner over to him. He had his lunch. I was there over the lunch period. I saw him eat. Fine, no problems there. They took it away. He was very pleasant, said thank you, and wouldn't leave that spot for 4 hours. And I just it was like a bit of a powder keg. You did get the impression this guy was highly defensive and very, very not in a good space. So a lot of the times, of course, I've done my observations, I've got an idea, I speak to the staff, they all tell me different things about, they said about him not sleeping very well. They were saying about, they noticed that he becomes a bit more agitated in the afternoons. They were saying about him, the circumstances around him chasing people with the broom and things like that. Were quite, they were doing very, very their best to make sure that Marty unfortunately didn't get access to things like that. And they were using some they were using a lot of antipsychotic medication and other forms of chemical restraint just to sort of keep a lid on it, they said, for this chap. And I got it. I understood their perspective, and I also saw a very, very scared individual. And with everybody, you don't know until you know the person, until you've actually had the chance to meet the person and actually get a handle on their history, and get an idea of where they're at and where they're coming from. Do we get anywhere close to solving these problems? So his sister was there that afternoon, and another part of our role, and probably one of my favorite parts of my role, is that we get to hear people's stories, and I feel very privileged quite often that I get to hear these stories, and they're the best part. As I say, they're the best thing. And so his sister was there, and I was able to obtain some social history from her. So what do we know about Marty? So Marty grew up on a farm. He grew up in a farming community. He was a very loved working with his hands and loved being outdoors and doing all sorts of things like that. And when he eventually left the farm and had an apartment living, a little ground floor apartment somewhere. His little patio area that he had was indeed the envy of the world. He was a very keen gardener and grew vegetables, and was just somebody that really needed to be outdoors all the time. He apparently played the spoons. That was another little fun thing. So he's quite a musical chap. So he really enjoyed playing. I don't think up to that day I'd met anyone who actually played the spoons. So that was something else. But the one thing that really sort of hit home for me with Marty is that his sister confirmed that Marty did have an intellectual disability. That was something that she mentioned very early on, and that from a very young age until early adulthood, Marty lived in a boarding school. He was sent for a special school for boys, as people were sent back then, and he lived in this arrangement until 18, 19 years old, when he was moved out into the community and lived in a ground floor apartment where he'd lived by himself for another 40 plus years. So to give some perspective, I think, to Marty's experience, maybe growing up in this environment, I know that the particular home for boys that he lived in now offers ghost tours. So I think that might give some slight inroads into kind of imagining what it looked like and what may or may not have occurred. So we have a gentleman that I understood was very scared. He'd only been living in the care home for 2 weeks, and twice during that time he'd been sent to hospital for aggressive behavior. He'd been living by himself pretty much solidly, and all that time. And when he first came into the care home, the first thing he said to his sister was, wow, this is just like being back at the boys' home again. So he's accessing memories from that time, and it was probably the last time that Marty lived in such a communal setting. So when we have a change behavior, someone's distressed, as Marty is, I try to have to look at contributing factors. So what are the things, therefore, that are possibly contributing to Marty's change behavior? So relocation stress is something that we often talk about, and you know, as a rule, there's no how long's a piece of string, but as a rule, someone might need months to certainly get more familiar with their surroundings and certainly feel like, you know, some part of it is home to them. So 2 weeks is yeah, it's a very early days in these cases. Communal living, as I say, the last time Marty was in communal living was when he was living in a boys' home. 40 years of living by himself, developing alcohol-related dementia. Of course, in the background, that was always going on. But suddenly to go from that environment into an environment where he's living in a dementia unit now with, I think, 20 to 25 other people, that's a huge thing to have to get used to. So anxiety in new surroundings, I mean, boy, you've got all of those combined coming together. And of course, no one knows much about this gentleman, unfortunately. Nobody knew his background. They suspected he had an intellectual disability. They didn't know about the boys' home thing. You know, I often say, you know, when we're trying to talk to staff, care staff in care homes about someone to change behavior, if you can find a context for it, you know, it might not, you might not be able to reduce the behavior, and there's certainly nothing we can do about someone's history. But to understand where that change behavior comes from really, I think, helps care staff. And certainly it's helped me over the years, you know, actually cope better with it. So those are the things that I think was really important in Marty's case to get across in the first instance. Then, as we were talking about other things that, you know, might contribute to Marty's, to his aggressive presentation. So my understanding was, we had a guy that was very, very hypervigilant, and when anyone came up to him or he felt that somebody was too close to him, he'd defend himself, and he would defend himself with whatever he could find. It was very, very noisy on that dementia unit. For somebody that likes to be outside a lot, somebody that, likes to do their own thing, to, as I say, be put in a very, very busy environment, that was a real trigger for Marty to sort of become a bit aggressive. It was suspected that Marty may have also had some depression as well, and he may have been depressed for a long time. And his sister was suspecting that that's why Marty drank as well, to the extent he did, and that was contributing as well to his falling asleep and not being able to fall asleep. And that was also quite difficult for him to manage. And back pain, because he'd worked in his garden pretty much all the time, and he was on no regular analgesia or anything like that, and all it took was a little bit of back pain and noise, and he's not feeling great, and he's anxious, and the only historical context he's got is the boys' home, and all of those things I suggested added up and contributed to aggressive behavior. So what we're going to do to manage this. So I was on site normally we're on site for a couple of days, maybe 2 to 3 days, just to meet as many people as possible and just to talk to many people as possible and try to get some of my often quite crazy ideas implemented in the care homes. So what are the things that I was thinking of that I thought, we could try and implement then and there, so that we could maybe find some ways of managing this? Manage the noise level. So this was a big thing, and it was something that the care home had been thinking about doing for some time, which was to try and introduce some times in the afternoons where it was a little bit quieter. So to find some time after lunch maybe, or before the evening meal, the 5 o'clock meal, where we could just have a couple of hours maybe on the unit where it was quiet. And so everyone got a bit of a breather from that. And they were very happy to start that almost straight away. Quiet rooms, I'll just jump one over there. The quiet room one, there was a room that they weren't using that Marty was encouraged to go and spend time in as well, so that he also got a bit of a break from everyone else. But because he's so anxious, he didn't want to leave his spot, you see. So we had to find a way of, I guess, if we knew it was going to be noisy, and we're always expecting these things to happen, to try and encourage him to go on to another unit, into another room. And we often offered him, because he'd often talk about wanting a drink, and they didn't want to necessarily give him alcohol because of the scenario he's in with alcohol-induced dementia, and that was the family were adamant they didn't want to pursue that. So we introduced non-alcoholic beer. And Marty was incredibly happy to have non-alcoholic beer in his quiet room or in the garden, because he's most comfortable in the garden. And so we were able to offer him 2 extra spaces away from the environment when it was noisy, and he could spend time in the environment when it was a bit quieter. A buffer buddy, I think I invented that, I'm not sure, but a buffer buddy, on the second day, I sat with Marty, and every time there was a noise, or every time somebody came on the unit and he'd look up or he'd become a bit hypervigilant, I'd sit there with him and I'd just sort of go, "Oh yeah, look, who's that? Do you know who they are?" Yeah, and just chat to him about it and bring him down again, and just sort of a buffer to the changing in the environments. Quite often just putting a thumbs up or something like that, just to check he's okay as well. Just, it doesn't take any time, and it was something that people could do quite easily. And we said to the staff, just sit there and do your notes if you need to with him. You don't have to talk or engage in much conversation, but it's something you can do. We introduced, we made also a big thing around maybe redirecting other residents in the unit away from Marty as well, because some were very coming up to Marty quite close, learning about him, want to know who he is, and some don't always have that spatial awareness all the time. So it was good to maybe, rather than not focus on Marty, who's fine doing what he's doing, actually focus on the others sometimes. And 2 things that we found we could engage him with quite quickly. One was the photo album. He's family were bringing in photos as and when of his family, and he had lots of brothers and sisters, and things like that. So that was something we were certainly trying to implement. And a map of the local area. And I actually love maps. We had one, the lifestyle team found a little map of the local area, and we put it out in front of Marty, and we were able to get him to, show us where he'd been and where he lived and what he was doing. And because he'd worked on farms quite a lot, he'd been traveling around a little bit as an adult, and working on different gardens and environments. So it was nice for him to be able to understand where he was in relation to where he is now, and where his place is, and where his sister lives, and where his other brother lives, and things like that. And that could stay out on the table for other people to come over and chat to him about. So it was more around starting conversations with him as well. So we were the staff at this care home were wonderful, and we were able to get a lot of those things up and running within a couple of days. And it's nice when you can actually have, tools and props and things to hand, so that you can have the non-alcoholic beer as a way, and then you can model that, and you can say, this is what I mean, encourage him to go in the quiet room, or get him to sit in the garden and sit out there and have a non-alcoholic beer with him, or something like that. Now, for some cases as well, if there are no specialists involved by a geriatrician or another service like the mental health team, we do often as well liaise with clinical associate geriatricians and so on that are in our organization, to do a medication review. It's something that we offer, and it's something we can, I speak with the local prescriber, the GP, and work alongside them as well, because some of these cases are very, 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 very complex sometimes. And I was able to feed the details of my assessment over to one of our clinical associate geriatricians on the phone, via email, and they were able to make some recommendations, some advice for the local doctor. And in this case, we felt that it was quite appropriate to suggest an antidepressant for Marty, particularly metazapine in the first instance. He was on, as I think I mentioned, he was on some antipsychotics. He was receiving risperidone, quite a lot of risperidone during the day, and also they had midazolam for emergencies. And we suggested to, wean and cease the risperidone. Consider things like pain is probably one of the biggest things that we try and outrule very early on, is underlying pain. It was clear to me that Marty had back pain, as well as a non-pharmacological approach around what he's sitting in, and looking at arranging things around the chairs. Regular Panadol was suggested, as well as pregabalin, in addition to that for breakthrough pain, and cease the midazolam, and I think we stepped it down a bit to something like clonazepam for emergencies only. Now, all of that took a few days of very intense work on site, but also we had quite a lot of, as I say, changes happening in the background and so on. And yeah, it ended up with us, things did get better. Things worked really, really well. And about 3 to 4 weeks after that, we regularly follow up with care homes. We regularly look back and things like that. And yeah, I had an email come back from them, just to say, I'm happy to say that Marty, this is from the care manager, the referrer, saying, I'm happy to say that Marty has been much more settled since your last visit and recommendations. Instead of being afraid of Marty, they all adore him now. And I have to thank you, Ashley, for coming in and seeing what the hurdles were and the interventions you gave us. Marty is the person he once was: happy, healthy, fun, with a sense of humor. And yeah, I think, yeah, that was a real win. And we went from something that was, I really, really struggled to think how on earth I could actually do any good with this one. And we ended up getting a really, really good result. And yeah, they even bought him in some spoons so that he could keep playing the spoons. So yeah, a bit of a win. That one always good to get.